On today's show, with all of the physicality in the Four Nations game between the U.S. and Canada, somewhere Tom Wilson is sitting back on his couch and thinking to himself, hey guys, miss me yet?
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the future of Hendrix Lapierre, former first-round pick, and is he ultimately living up to what our expectations of a first-round player should be? Listen, he has had his kick at the can, different opportunities in the NHL, but ultimately has not made the most of them. He was a part of that troubled third line earlier for the Capitals and ultimately got sent down to Hershey for more playing time. So the question begs to be asked, should the Capitals try to trade him to get an asset that will help bolster this team in their playoff push? I'll talk about that. A bit later, I'll talk about Alex Ovechkin, and will he be watching the Four Nations face-off games? But just to get it going here, talking about all of the physicality in the Four Nations game Saturday against U.S. versus Canada. Wow, what a game. If you want physicality, well, physicality is what you got right off the bat. What was it, 3 fights in 9 seconds of the game or some crazy stat like that? And I said I wasn't going to watch these games and be too interested, but I got kind of sucked in because I'm a hockey fan at the end of the day. And, I wish that there were Capitals players involved in this tournament. I think that Logan Thompson, based on what we saw from Binghamton in the game, I think that they might be thinking to themselves, hey, we could have used Logan Thompson in the game. But one player other than Logan Thompson seems like he could have definitely helped Team Canada in one regard, and that is in the physicality department. So let's dive into that in this first segment here. We're going to talk about the Four Nations face-off in the thrilling clash we saw between the U.S. and Team Canada, and it was an incredible game. The U.S. Ultimately emerged victorious with a 3-1 victory. Gensel showing up big for Team USA. And, there was a lot going on back and forth with the booing of the national anthem and all that. I think that ultimately that is what stoked the fire between these two teams. But there's so much to discuss regarding Canada's performance, particularly their physicality or the lack thereof. Intensity was what was apparent right from the jump. We were treated to an intense atmosphere. I mean, 3 fights in just the first 9 seconds. And I've heard rumblings that there were actual texts going between players to ultimately stoke that fire. Do we want to say that this is an improvement over the All-Star games that we've seen before? Yeah, you don't see this hunger. You don't see this determination in an all-star game, which is what we've seen in these Four Nation face-offs game. Quite something. And that game yesterday, was absolutely insane. The Tkachuk brothers really set the tone early, but as the game wore on, it became evident the Canadians weren't matching that intensity. They let the U.S. dictate both the pace and physicality of the game, which played a pivotal role in how things unfolded. So I think that, if you're going to do a little bit of Monday morning quarterback or look in the rearview mirror, I think that Team Canada was saying, hey, we probably could have used Tom Wilson. We probably could have used Logan Thompson. But in this segment in particular, talking about the impact of Tom Wilson, good old number 43, one player who could have made a noticeable difference in the physical aspect is Tom Wilson, of course, from our beloved team, the Capitals. We all know Wilson brings that perfect mix of size, toughness, and offensive prowess to the ice. And, in a lot of ways, as a Capitals fan, being that, the Capitals are a U.S.-based team, it would have been odd to a certain extent to see him drop the gloves against a U.S. team, on an odd level. But for me, that just would have seemed a little odd to me. But at 6'4" and 220 pounds, he's the kind of player who can completely shift the dynamics of a game with his physical presence. We've seen it. If you're a Capitals fan, you know what he brings to this team, the enforcer. Sometimes he doesn't even need to drop the gloves anymore. He's the sheriff of the Capitals, where he can kind of just skate into the vicinity of problems, and all of a sudden those things kind of disperse. Ultimately, what makes Tom Wilson a four-leaf clover, a unicorn, anything that has to do with a unique nature. Now, while players like Brad Marchand and Sam Bennett are immensely talented, they just don't bring that intimidating stature that can make opponents second-guess their decisions out there. And like I've talked about Tom Wilson this year, as far as the Capitals are concerned, he is concentrating more on the goal scoring than the physicality, even though he still is getting in a lot of hits, those kind of things, not dropping the mitts as much as he once did. But I would have a feeling if the Tkachuk brothers brought that kind of an intensity and Tom Wilson was in the game, he could have definitely been the equalizer, if you will. I think that I'm not going to say that the Tkachuk brothers would not have taken on Tom Wilson, but I think to a certain extent it gives you pause that, I'm taking on a big opponent. I hope I ate a hearty breakfast before I take on this kind of endeavor. That I think that ultimately, even if he didn't have to drop the mitts with a lot of different U.S. players, I think that he would have been that equalizing presence. Now, ultimately, for me, a missed opportunity for Team Canada. Just imagine if Wilson had been in the lineup versus the U.S. His gritty play style could have helped Canada assert themselves and play more of an aggressive style, something we saw effective for the U.S. Now, they really embraced physicality, and it paid dividends. I think the Team USA sized up Canada and said, hey, pound for pound, as far as physicality is concerned, we've got these guys beat. Not only did they engage in battles along the boards, but they also generated scoring chances by forcing turnovers and taking advantage of mistakes. And, I keep talking Capitals. It's easy for Team USA to take this positive momentum, vacuum it up, or maybe consider it a bottle, put a cork in it, and release it in their next game. Now, it's about more than just star power. It's about having a balanced approach that includes a strong physical game. And they are trying to take the enforcer, the physicality out of modern hockey. But make no mistake about it, physicality was the glaring deficiency of Team Canada in Saturday's game, and why those players like Tom Wilson still ultimately have a role in playing. That it's not just, Tom Wilson, the goal scorer, but his grittiness also factors in. Looking back, Canada had elite talents, Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby on the ice, but without that physical component, they fell short. I think that there's a lot at stake. And of course, you're playing for pride, for your home country, of course, the four nations. But I think that fire has been especially stoked due to recent situations. I don't need to go into any more depth than that. It's about more than just star power. It's about having a balanced approach that includes a strong physical game. The lack of a player like Wilson explains why Canada struggled to bring that same level of pressure. So again, if they have another one of these tournaments, the decision making has been flawed, and ultimately, why I think the whole tournament doesn't hold a lot of credibility with me. The fact, and I'm going back to LT, that he wasn't chosen. The fact that Tom Wilson wasn't chosen, just a total mess as far as I'm concerned. The physicality we witnessed from the Team USA was truly a game changer. They demonstrated how skill can be complemented by grit, proving that in a rivalry game like this, toughness can be key. Never overlook toughness. Now, as we look ahead, it'll be fascinating to see how Canada adapts in the next matchup game they have. They're going to need this win, and I think we can all agree that bringing in players who excel at the tough brand of hockey will be crucial as well. So, again, it is Monday morning quarterbacking. It is looking in the rearview mirror, but I think that Canada probably is thinking to themselves, this was not the right idea. So the Four Nations face-off taught us that physicality shouldn't be taken lightly, and perhaps if Canada had a player like Tom Wilson in their lineup, things may have gone along differently, right? I think there would have still been physicality, but I think a mitigating factor would have been number 43. Now, the U.S. has nothing at stake in their upcoming game against Sweden, allowing them to focus on player health ahead of the finals with potential for resting key players like Connor Hellebuyck. Again, I didn't talk about him earlier, but holy cow, what an excellent netminder. And I know that Logan Thompson, but Connor Hellebuyck was dialed in this game and quite a dynamic presence in net for the Team US. Now, a bit of a note, if you didn't watch the game, Matthew Tkachuk didn't play the final 12:36 of the game because of a lower body injury. He stayed on the bench. Sullivan said Tkachuk was being evaluated, and the coach was not sure of his status for the game against Sweden. Canada defenseman Cale Makar illness did not play. Defenseman Thomas Harley was also added to the roster and played 18-17. Canada was already without defenseman Shea Theodore, who is out for the rest of the tournament because of an upper body injury. Cooper said Makar was close to playing, and that is hopeful that the defenseman can return in their next game. So quite a game, and quite an upgrade over the All-Star game. Let me know your thoughts on Twitter at DanCaps218, at Locked On Caps, or of course always on YouTube. If you were looking for physicality, if you were looking at the true value of good old number 43 there, that was glaringly apparent in the U.S.-Canada game. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the Great Eight in his thoughts on the whole Four Nations face-off. Obviously, Russia was not included in this tournament, so what are Ovi's thoughts? He weighs in straight ahead. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. And listen, there is a lot of excitement around the NBA right now, whether you're a Wizards fan or if you're caught up in all the action between the Mavericks and the Lakers. It is an exciting time to watch the NBA season. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this next segment here, we are going to talk about Alex Ovechkin in his whole thoughts on the Four Nations face-off. And ultimately, will he be watching these games? It is interesting to think about. We know he is down in Miami right now. We saw pictures of Dmitry Orlov and his social media kind of hanging out on the beach together, but ultimately a good time for the Great Eight to rest and recuperate. And what we've heard him say is that he's going to spend the opening part of this Four Nations break to rest, and then the final part to get some workout in. And we saw that was taking place, as well as on the socials. You saw Alex Ovechkin doing some sit-ups there, so he is already getting in some work here. So that's what we're going to dive into here next, is the news surrounding Alex Ovechkin and what he is up to on this Four Nations break, and will he be watching any of these games? So let's get into it. As many of you know, Ovechkin is currently enjoying what I'm going to say a well-deserved vacation in Miami, Florida, soaking up the rays with his family and former teammate Dmitry Orlov. And it's interesting, that even the common bond, and I'm going to say it seems like the bond with Russian players is that much greater than I've seen than with other players that no longer play together. Oftentimes it's like, if a fellow American played with each other, they might hang out together if they don't play together anymore. But what I've noticed is that Alex Ovechkin still keeps a close relationship with former countrymen and players that he once played with. But as far as the Four Nations Face-Off Tournament is concerned, there has been some talk about the ongoing Four Nations Face-Off Tournament, and it turns out that Ovi isn't too keen on watching it. Why, you might ask? Well, it's pretty straightforward. With Russia not being invited to participate in the tournament, Ovechkin made it crystal clear that he has no interest in tuning in. Kind of like the same way that I don't have a lot of interest in watching these games that none of the Capitals players were selected. Ultimately, I did because I cover an NHL team and it's my due diligence. But he said, quote, "I won't be watching the Four Nations tournament," unquote, highlighting how little significance it holds for him without the Russian team involved. Ovechkin told Match TV's Pavel Lenskov. So I understand where he's coming from, and we know the reasons why, political things that are going on over in Russia, that kind of thing. But excluding those issues, I know there's serious issues, but it would be nice if Russia could participate at some point in the future. Again, I'm not the decision maker. I don't want to go into the weeds about why they're not playing into it. I think you all know why. But it would be nice if at some point, Team Russia, considering their elite level talent that they have, could participate. And the ban, as we know with Russia, it looks like the ban has been extended and has been extended through the 25-26 season. So at some point, I would like to see Russia participate again in these tournaments. Again, there is a lot of elite level talent other than Alex Ovechkin, of course, that it is kind of a shame, I guess you could say, that none of those players were included. But what it's all about, this Four Nations face-off, we know that he's not going to be watching these games, or he says he's not. You got to think at the end of the day, being that he's in his apartment, struggling through in his apartment on Miami Beach there somewhere, that at night after the kids go to bed, he might not pop on the TV and see what good old Team USA or Canada or one of the other countries is doing. I think at the end of the day, that's it. That's just his sour grapes about the whole situation. But what this is all about, the Four Nations face-off, is recovery for Ovechkin. We know that lower leg fibula fracture that he's recovered from, that head coach Spencer Carberry said he's still not 100%, that this is a good time for him to be 100% a one-play return. So instead of watching the tournament, Ovechkin is prioritizing his recovery after dealing with that injury. He's been hard at work and staying in shape while enjoying his time off. Now, keep in mind, he hasn't suited up for the Russian national team since he brought home a bronze from the 2019 World Championship. So, it would be nice, like I say, at some point. I don't know if it's going to happen within Alex Ovechkin's career. Actually, it probably won't, considering that the ban has been extended, or I guess something crazy could happen and Alex Ovechkin could sign some sort of new deal with the Capitals. But very well was the last opportunity that Ovechkin would be able to participate in an event of this nature. Now, the Capitals' current standing, with the Capitals currently leading the Eastern Conference, I'm still feeling good about that. It's a great time for Ovi and his teammates to recharge, especially since they're all sitting out the international play. Even though, of course, I'm sure like a lot of you Capitals fans, we don't get it. First place in the Metro, first place in the Eastern Conference, tied with the best team in the NHL at points, that it ultimately doesn't make sense. But the joke's on you, Canada. The joke's on you, Canada. No Wilson, no Logan Thompson. How's about that? All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about the future of Hendrix Lapierre, former first-round pick. It seems like he has not quite lived up to potential. How many times are we going to try to retread that tire with Hendrix Lapierre? It's going to be his year next year. No, next year. He just needs a little bit more time. Or should the Capitals try to move him in favor of picking up an asset that could help bolster the Capitals' push this year? I'll break it all down straight ahead. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. Now, what sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage up to $5 million, no medical exam required, and it's more affordable than you think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. Go to selectquote.com/lockedonnhl today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. SelectQuote, they shop, you save. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. All right, in this next segment here, we are going to talk about Hendrix Lapierre and should the Capitals try to move him here at the trade deadline? As we know, contractually, he could be on to greener pastures. So should the Capitals try to move him now while they still have rights to him, or he could walk in the offseason for nothing? So it is an interesting question for the Capitals to deal with. I heard that Dan Kingerski of National Hockey Now, and more specifically Pittsburgh Hockey Now, posted on Twitter that Hendrix Lapierre is one of the players that the Pittsburgh Penguins might be pursuing, players that are looking for greener pastures and a change of zip code. I'm paraphrasing, but what he's getting at is that the Penguins are looking at young talent, and could Hendrix Lapierre be one of those players? Now, before you go and say they're not going to move a player to the Penguins, Dan, okay, maybe you don't remember Niskanen or Orpik, players that we got from the Penguins, but that's rather here nor there. Let's dive into Hendrix Lapierre and his future with the team. Today, we're going to dive into that, Hendrix Lapierre, and why now might be the right time for the Caps to explore trading him as we make this playoff push. Listen, if we want players that are going to be better than a Lars Eller, then we're going to have to give up some bigger pieces. And I think the biggest feather in his hat, Hendrix Lapierre, was that he was huge last season in the Calder Cup, MVP, Jack Butterfield Trophy, those kind of things, that if the Capitals leaned into their strengths, that it could ultimately help get a return for the team. So a look back at his history, drafted in 2020 as the 22nd overall pick, expectations were high for Hendrix. He arrived with a lot of potential, showcasing his skills in the AHL and earning recognition along the way. However, though, since making the jump to the NHL, Lapierre has struggled to find his footing, and ultimately why he was sent back down to Hershey. I think that Hendrix Lapierre was kind of making plans in D.C. to be his forever home, but in a league of what have you done for me lately, he needs to take a page from the Connor McMichael book and make the most of your opportunities when given those opportunities. Now, with only 9 goals to show for his efforts going all the way back to 2021. Those are NHL stats. It's clear that he has not lived up to the lofty standards set for a first-round pick. Now, this current season performance, he's found some rhythm in the AHL, tallying 2 goals and 9 assists with the Hershey Bears. Notably, he made a significant impact during the Calder Cup playoffs last year, scoring 7 goals and providing 15 assists in 20 games, earning the MVP honors with the Jack Butterfield Trophy. So he knows how to play, and I mean, I'm going to even say his tenure with the Bears this season, except for the last couple games, hasn't been that great. And when he's been given his opportunity on the big team, the Capitals, he has not made the most of them. That's the hard part for me. And it's sustainability. When you get up here, it's not scoring a goal or 2 in a game and thinking that you're set. You need sustainability. That performance certainly reignited hope around his potential, but we need to consider the bigger picture. Is next year going to be the year for him? Is it going to be the year after? When is it going to be the time? And when, as Capitals fans and the brass of the Capitals organization, are we going to say we need to cut ties? And oftentimes people go, Philip Forsberg, PTSD, Philip Forsberg. Listen, that is not an apples for apples comparison. So I think that Hendrix Lapierre on paper alone looks like he should be a knockout for the Capitals. We have not seen that. So at some point, we need to cut bait and try to get a player that is going to bolster this team. So recent developments, recently he's been on a bit of a hot streak, putting up 5 points, 2 goals, 3 assists in his last 2 games, and really making his presence felt. That's good, but sustainability has always been the bugaboo for young Mr. Hendrix. Despite that, we have to remember he also endured some tough moments, like being part of the struggling third line for the Capitals before his demotion to Hershey for more playing time. So where it gets interesting, it's all about dollars and nickels and dimes and all that. Strategic considerations given his current trajectory and contract situation, a 3-year deal with a cap hit of $863,344. We might want to think strategically. The Capitals, as we know, are gearing up for a playoff push, first in the Metro, first in the Eastern Conference. All is good, but there's still some missing pieces. That third line he was once a part of is still struggling. And Lars Eller was not the key to fix that at the center position. They could also leverage the potential to acquire a player who can contribute to the ambitions right now, this season. Ovechkin, this year, next year, off into the sunset. We need to make hay while the sun shines. So with his contract expiring at the end of the 24-25 season, this season, he could be a valuable asset in a trade. So those are all things to consider, and ultimately why I think they need to do it. To pull the Band-Aid off, as hard as it might be. So the question is, would a trade now help solidify our roster for this season? Yes, it would, but not Hendrix Lapierre in and of himself. I still think that Mangiapane, while he has been a good asset for this team, not a great asset, could be bundled. I think that TVR could be bundled. Lars Eller, players like that, bundled, and also players on the blue line, as there is a glut of talent on the blue line. This prospect and that prospect, the Capitals defenseman, blah, blah. There's only going to be so much room for these players, right? And also, if you want to widen the lens even a little bit more, Charlie Lindgren. Are they going to come to terms with him at some point here? They say they're going to do it, but we have not seen any evidence of that. Or Hunter Shepard, who is also in a contract here. All of these put together in a nice bundle package could pick up an asset. So that's what I think the Capitals need to view Hendrix Lapierre right now is an asset. And some people have that memory of like, well, didn't you see what he did in the last game? Well, good. I'm glad he played well. That is going to increase his value potentially to get a bigger player. If he had still been stinking this whole time, then they're not going to get anything for him. But, on a resume where you're like first round pick, that's only going to go so far. At some point, you need results in the National Hockey League, or you're just going to be expendable, or your future is just going to be an AHL player. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's still pro hockey, and they still pull down 6-figure numbers. I would love to make 6 figures a year. So it's never a pejorative to say an AHL player. It's still quite an accomplishment to play pro hockey. I'm even going to go down to the ECHL. If you are in the ranks of pro hockey, you've done some things right in your professional hockey pursuits. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Washington Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.